joining us for Let's Talk. Today we're going to be talking about racism and the Bible. Have you guys experienced racism in your life before?
I mean, racism in general, yeah. I think like it's almost on like a weekly, bi-weekly basis for me. So that's a lot.
Yeah, especially with all this whole George Floyd thing going on. I feel like it has made the world a little bit more aware of like racism and like what Black people have been going through. Experienced like racism in the church or, you know, shopping or going to the malls or anything.
I mean, like, yeah, but it was like, I went to like Sally's in Peterborough and I walked in. I wouldn't say it's really racism, but like I walked in, they didn't greet me at the door, and then like white people walked in after and like they said hi, like how are you doing, like, and asked like if they needed help with anything. Like they didn't really like acknowledge me when I walked in and stuff, so like it was a little bit like uncomfortable, but I wouldn't say it's like blatant like racism, but
yeah, no, for me too. I've experienced that as well, like stories. It's not like it's blatant as you said, but it kind of makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable,
Yeah.
a little bit like taken aback as well. What about you, Felicia?
I remember when we were going, like, we were in Ottawa, we were shopping for my grad dress at Le Chateau, and we walked in, and yeah, no one, like, acknowledged us as if, like, we couldn't afford what we were buying or something like that type of thing.
Yeah, so there's also a couple of stories in the Bible where Jesus addresses racism or like discrimination more so. And the first story that comes to my mind is the Good Samaritan. So if someone can read Luke 10 verses 25 to 37.
One day, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him the question, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "How does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbors as yourself." "Right," Jesus told him. "Do this and you will live." The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and let him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed by him. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then the despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him on to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you next time I'm here." "Now which of these 3 would you say was the neighbor to the man who was attacked by the bandits?" Jesus asked. The man replied, "The one who showed him mercy." Then Jesus said, "Yes, now go and do the same."
Okay, so thank you. What do you guys think was the significance of the priests in this story? So remember, it's like the priest who walked by and he didn't help the guy. What do you think like the priest represents in this story in terms of like discrimination?
I mean, I would probably say like it represents like the bystander, like the person that like kind of like it's wrong because you were raised the right way, but then you kind of just watch it past you and you're like, oh, if I say anything, like I don't want to look bad, so let me just like stay to my corner and just like pray for them on the corner instead of like actually doing something.
Yeah, exactly. Because especially like in Jewish culture, the priest was the one who was like very esteemed. They were the ones who sacrificed animals to forgive like people's sin. And if someone like so holy who knew like the Bible, like the priest who couldn't even like help a fellow Jewish person. As I said, like many times, like when we witness discrimination, like we know the Bible for ourselves, we know the truth, and like we still sit there and we do nothing. We're like, oh yeah, like I'll pray for the family. But like later on, I feel like the significance why Jesus uses like a Samaritan in this story to help, because if you look at like the background of like the Jewish and the Samaritans, right? The Jews did not like the Samaritans at all, even though they were both from Israel descent. They didn't like the Samaritans because they had intermarried with other races, and according to like Jewish laws, that was like totally unholy or whatever. So they didn't even want to be on the same street as the Samaritans. They showed a lot of prejudice towards the Samaritans, and Jesus used the Samaritan in the story to show them that you guys need to stop being discriminatory. Like, these are my fellow children. I love them as well. And another story that comes to mind talking about Samaritans for me is the 10 leopards. So does anyone know like why this story is significant and why Jesus chose this story again to address racial prejudice in Jesus' time?
I can't even why I don't remember all the story.
Yeah,
I remember parts.
let's go over it. So basically, like the 10 lepers, wasn't there like a few that like were healed or like didn't say thank you to Jesus, but one stayed back to say thank you?
Yeah, so the story is found in Luke 17, verses 11 to 19. So basically there was 10 lepers, and Jesus healed them, and they just went on their way, and the only one that came back to say thank you was a Samaritan. And clearly we can see like the Jews, the way they treated the Samaritan, him being healed, I think had a greater impact than all the other Jews were healed, because for Jesus to heal him must have been, such a great thing in his life, being like Jesus, he put aside his racial prejudice and he saw me as a man who was like inflicted, and he forgave my sins, and he forgave me. So I feel like looking at these stories about the Samaritans, we can apply it to our lives.
So, I mean, going back to what you were saying about like, the Samaritan like having such an impact from like Jesus healing him, like even coming back to like recent times and stuff, like do you guys think like even being as Christians, like do we go out and protest? Like do we, like fight racial injustice, or like do we, for example, like the priest, like we just pray for them, like we have this like we were taught better kind of idea, and we're just like, yeah, we'll just pray it away. Like what do you guys think like is best?
I feel like riots and protests are very different. Like, it's one thing to go out and like hold a sign and represent like your beliefs, and it's another thing to go and like steal and like burn down other people's houses and stuff. So I feel like standing up for what you believe is very important, and that's something that you should do. But like stealing and stuff, I feel like that's more for your own personal gain than you wanting to prove a point and like support a cause. So I feel like we should definitely go out and like stand up for what we believe and just do it the right way.
And I feel like in our own personal lives, every day we have to be showing like the character of God. Like, you're not going to be saying negative things against like other races. Like, yes, I do believe like we have to like going to the protest is like a good thing to like stand up. But like in our everyday lives, we have to be that witness as well. Not only on that day am I gonna, stand up all the time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I want to add to that too. Like, it's one thing to be a witness and to basically turn the other cheek, but it's another thing to let it keep rolling and keep allowing it to happen. But I think like even the way that Jesus sometimes shut down the Pharisees, like basically teaching them the ways of God, but also saying like, you know what, like you say you do this, but at the same time you're not doing this. So like I think there's like you guys are saying, like, peaceful ways of how we can fight it, but just taking the example of Jesus and making sure that like we are standing up for injustice, but also at the same time we're not doing it in a way like Clecia said, like, that's angry, that's hostile, that's like, really shows that I mean, we could definitely be angry, but I think there's a level of anger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely agree.
I feel like there is also like a time to fight and stuff, but it definitely has to be like led by God. You can't just be like, let me just go and fight them. Because I know many of the times, like when the Israelites were on their way to Canaan, there was many like different cities and stuff that they had to attack because they didn't want to let the Israelites pass through. So I feel like definitely there is a time to fight. You don't always just have to be, peaceful all the time, but it definitely has to be like led by God, like let God fight for you.
Okay, well, thank you guys for joining us on Let's Talk. Today we discussed racism in parallel to the Good Samaritan and how Jesus had dealt with racial discrimination in his time, and hopefully you guys learned something from this. Thank you guys for joining us on Let's Talk, and we'll talk next week.